Hey, what's up? It's Bon. Let's talk about Cyberpunk, and more so about the implications of news that we got this week about the game, and kind of a little bit of a hindsight on the game and a look forward. So we found out this week that Cyberpunk is getting its only DLC for 2077. It will be. It has Keanu Reeves voicing in it. It looks like it's going to be some type of. You're going to be working for whatever political force it remains in the new United States of America, and it looks fine. I'm sure it'll be great. My relationship with Cyberpunk over the last couple of years has been probably similar to a lot of people's. I was initially interested back in the day. I then became extremely skeptical as the hype train got going really hard. I think very much because of CDPR, but also fans, getting a little too excited. And I was pretty skeptical about the game before it came out. And then when it came out, if you're listening to this, I assume you've at least been a part of some of the discourse. So we know that the game, there were really two big things when Cyberpunk came out. It was being kind of portrayed, in my opinion, by CDPR as them being like, this is going to be a revolutionary RPG. This is going to do for RPGs what The Witcher 3 did for them. And this is our new, this is going to be that. And it just wasn't. And obviously, most of the discussion and the talks about Cyberpunk 2077 comes down to the abysmal performance on what are now the last gen consoles, which it should have never come out on in the first place. And how that was hidden by CDPR. They didn't put out review codes for the old systems. They did not allow in the initial review period, they didn't allow even from PC users them to use their own footage and reviews and stuff. Obviously giant red flags, but the console one being the most because they were just straight hiding the issue because they knew it was bad. And then even after it came out and they acknowledged the issues, they still were kind of like, well, it seemed fine in our QA. And there had to have been an entire QA developer or studio just smacking their heads into the tables, because I'm sure that was not the case. Anyways, time is gone. They've gotten the game working okay on the old systems. They have gotten them working pretty good on the new consoles and on PC. But that leads to the second issue that Cyberpunk had, is that it's really just kind of a generic RPG. I've described it as being a mile wide and an inch deep. So just for full clarity, I've watched 3 or 4 playthroughs from beginning to end from streamers and YouTubers and stuff like that. It's something I like to do while I'm working. I like to have something like that on. And I've played back in, I think, the 1.5 patch. They had a limited timed trial that you could do. I think it was 4 or 5 hours maybe. And I played that on my Series X. And so my take on it is just that it's just an okay RPG that has a good story and really interesting characters, and has a lot of neat details and mechanics in the engine and in the game, but just isn't revolutionary, and it's not even like amazing. It's just a good game. But that definitely wasn't what it was supposed to be. That wasn't how it was advertised. That wasn't what was promised. And I think that's where a lot of the resentment comes and a lot of the bad feelings. So as of today, what's going on is that this week they announced this DLC. They have announced it will be the only DLC. I believe it, if I remember correctly, it will not be on the old systems. And it's essentially going to mark the end of development on Cyberpunk 2077. So that leaves us in an interesting spot, right? So we know that the next Witcher game is probably their next big project. It's going to be on Unreal Engine 5. So from a development standpoint, they don't want to waste another minute on their own, on the engine that Cyberpunk is on, because it's useless to them now. And they need to make all the tools they need for Unreal for their next game. So they're going to be shifting over a huge part of their development to that, I'm sure. And it's interesting because the not doing further stuff on the old consoles makes sense, because they should have never put the game on that in the first place. But that leads to an interesting conversation, I think. This was very clearly, especially with its original release date, supposed to be a game that was supposed to be for the last consoles that they would also put on the new ones. And what it ended up being was a game for the new consoles, or for the current gen as of today, which is just bad development, in my opinion. They literally didn't target the console or the hardware that was available. They did, and I suspect it's more of an issue of not keeping the scale that they were going after under control, and that they just did a bad job when it comes to that. And kind of there's a Batman game that's coming out right now as well, where it seems like basically the same thing happened. The game was meant to be on both generations, and they just can't get the game to work on the old one, so they're kind of proposing it as like, oh no, it's a game for the next gen, even though it doesn't look like it. It looks fairly mediocre graphically. So, you know, we have that situation where the old consoles are getting left behind. That's fair, I think, at this point. And then this is the only DLC. They definitely at least implied originally that there are going to be multiple DLCs for this game. That's not happening now. They have left the door open for more Cyberpunk, and I think that it's almost guaranteed that after The Witcher 4 comes out, or whatever it's going to be called, that there will be a Cyberpunk 2, whatever it's going to be called. And that's fine. But it's just another example in this, and I feel like it's been a cycle, maybe forever, but it seems like especially in the last 10 years or so, where these studios have these grand ambitions and they try to make these giant games, and they just basically all but maybe not even a handful of games come out and meet anywhere near the expectation, whether it's graphically, story-wise, mechanically, or just simply how well it runs, whether it is like functional or not. You know, so we've had all these titles come out that are full price, or $60 or now $70, have all these promises, all this hype, all these pre-orders, all this good faith, all this goodwill from players. And it seems like if you were a betting person, you would bet for any big new hyped up game to be bad. And that sucks. Like, that's not good. But the problem is that I think the only solutions are just not going to happen. You know, we deal, I think a big problem is that a lot of gamers simply just don't understand how video games are made. And I won't even act like I do, but I think I do more so than others. And there's, you know, for even big AAA games, especially big AAA games, I just don't think people realize that the formula is relatively similar among all of these games. There's a multi-year pre-production and concept stage where a relatively small team puts together the story, what they want the game to be, and they even like prototype out like, okay, we want this mechanic to work like this, and they start making small chunks of the game to prepare to bring on a large development team that, in theory, by the time you go into production, after pre-production, they're just hammers and nails. You know, in pre-production, you decided what environments you need, what models you need, what the models need to do, the levels that you need, everything. And when you bring in the full production team, they just knock it out. That's why it's not uncommon for even a big giant AAA game to have a 2 or 3 year pre-production cycle, maybe longer, especially for a new IP. And then like a 2-year production cycle. And people think like, oh, there's no way they make these games in 2 years, and they do. If the pre-production is done well. And it seems like the pattern over the last 5-10 years has been that pre-production goes terribly, and they keep doing pre-production while they're doing production, and you end up with Anthem and Andromeda and a bunch of these other games, right? And so like in the case of Cyberpunk, I've seen people think like, well, they worked on this game for 13 years or whatever. It's like, no, they didn't. I believe, if I remember correctly, pre-production started in like 16 or 17, and then they started development, a couple of years before it came out, and then it came out. And that's just, that's a pretty typical time frame for these games. And so the only solution to not have this happen with, this, because Cyberpunk has a really cool concept, right? The idea of Cyberpunk 2077 is very, very cool. And so was the idea of Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem and a bunch of these other games that have come out that all had the same production problems in a very generic way. And it's just, they need more time, and they need good leadership. And the simple fact is that publishers, who are the ones actually funding the development and who make the money when they put the game out, they don't want to give time, because they need income. They need to make money. And then when it comes to leadership, well, I think we have an issue right now in the industry, at least it seems like it, of not very good, or at least not very consistent leadership. Whether you're talking about gigantic AAA companies being led by people who have been in the industry forever, for better or worse, or tiny little indies where people are, on a 4-person team and there's still issues with leadership at those levels. Obviously, we hear the most about the issues happening at the high level at AAA. But you've also seen some stories lately pop up about bad leadership, even in relatively small developers, AA developers or indie devs and stuff like that. So the problem is that the solution isn't really that simple. It's, at least for now, probably not going to change. I think just the visibility of the issues and people being much more vocal and stuff, hopefully will help with, publishers allowing devs the time they need, and people who are bad leaders not staying in those positions. But here's the thing. Cyberpunk 2077 was wildly financially successful. If any game you think of, even games like Mass Effect Andromeda, I'm fairly certain did pretty well financially. And the simple fact is that these publishers, whether it's EA or Ubisoft or whoever, at the end of the day, they care about that number, their profit number. And yeah, bad press and all that, they don't love it, but they get over pretty quick if their pockets are full. So my fear is that the solution that I'm portraying in a very simple way of just give them more time, but I also don't think it's going to happen. So I just I think it's an interesting problem to have, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see how things develop. Consumers sure seem to think that because they've expressed their anger and all of that over the years, that things are going to change. But publishers are making bank regardless. And so I don't know if it will change. So we'll have to wait and see. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Tell me what you think about this. What do you think the solutions are? Do you think I'm right or wrong? Do you have your own ideas? How did you feel about Cyberpunk? What do you think about what's going on with it now, what we're hearing? And and let me know. So be sure to subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment down below. Check me out on Twitter over @BondDiesel, as well as most other social places. You can also check out my podcast, The EchoCast, which is a gaming podcast with weekly updates on gaming in general, as well as segments for The Division and Mass Effect every week. And I also answer your questions. That is all I have for this one. So until next time.